After Hours is one of the rare examples of an album that is just as good as the hype that is received. The popularity matching the critical acclaim of an album like this, I won't say is unheard of, but it's definitely rare. So you can imagine the shock of myself, of his fan base, of his critics, of pretty much anyone who knows of The Weeknd not being nominated for a Grammy this year. Now, as a big artist, you're not entitled to win anything. But when you have a music business, a figure as big as the Grammys, a collective, an idea, an entity as big as the Grammys that pride themselves off of finding the best, the biggest, the largest examples of quality within the music space and have been playing a popularity game for the last, I don't know how many years, it's really eye-opening that you'd see an artist like The Weeknd come out and say that the Grammys are corrupt. Every single year, the Grammys throw artists, huge artists like Billie Eilish, Beyonce, Cardi B, Bruno Mars, Adele, Taylor Swift. You realize that there's a bit of a pattern in their selection process, that it's more likely than not that they're paying very close attention to albums that are receiving a ton of exposure, albums that have a baseline of entertainment value to them from artists that generally have a massive fan base. The Weeknd has been marketing After Hours from weeks before its release up until this very day, promoting this album, telling people it's out, adding extensions to this album, tweeting about its success, getting accolades and awards for this album. Outside of its musical quality, people are acknowledging how amazing it is that Abel made so much noise this year with After Hours. So to have a board or a committee as well known as the Grammys not acknowledge that at all in any category, whether it's R&B, pop, soul. I know sometimes the Grammys like to miscategorize things and they don't always put things in their proper respective areas or the proper space. So sometimes you'd get a Michael Kiwanuka in the rock category, or you'd have a Black Parade from Beyonce, which is a more hip-hop centric record, in the R&B category. I understand sometimes you fuck up, but not acknowledging one of the pieces of music in 2020 that arguably made the most noise for that year is something you can't just overlook or say, oh, we just forgot about it, or oh, we didn't even listen to that. Now, allegedly, The Weeknd had an ultimatum thrown his way by the Grammys, basically saying that you can't do a performance at the Grammys and also do one at the Super Bowl, so you're probably going to have to pick one. And the reason for this would be, in my opinion, because they don't want the dates of his performance to be so close to each other, the Super Bowl and the Grammys being pretty much just a week apart. There's a bit of an exclusivity to having The Weeknd perform at only one of these establishments, and the Grammys, being a huge figure in music, wouldn't want to miss out on this opportunity. And this is no shade to any of the other nominees, but out of everyone that was nominated, who would be likely to give you the biggest, the best show? Who would you get the most impressions from out of everyone nominated for a Grammy this year? If Abel was nominated, he would be the guy. And from the way The Weeknd is speaking, it kind of seems like that's the case, which is why even in the video I made earlier today, I was like, it seems like he really must have pissed somebody off, because not being acknowledged, even though you had probably the biggest album of that year, seems far more intentional than accidental. Now, according to World News Era, the current chief, Harvey Mason Jr., caught up with a few publications to discuss the Grammy nominations. He even discussed it with a few publications prior to the Grammy nominations being released. One of the things I found most glaring about a lot of the questions that he was asked, at least as it pertains to The Weeknd, is how hesitant he was to directly confront why The Weeknd probably wasn't nominated. One of the questions that was asked was, I can understand how he could have been shut out of a genre category. The pop committee could have said he's R&B. The R&B committee could have said he's pop. But this is unprecedented. Does it put the nominating process into question? Are there any plans to revise it? And he basically says a bunch of shit to just reinforce the narrative that we know what we're doing, don't worry about it. But this is the thing that I thought was the funniest, because he says they were critically listening to every song that came across their desk or virtual desk, so I don't think it shows a flaw in the process. I think it's actually, as you get a nomination, you start to really appreciate the process, where you're saying, I really made it through a strenuous and thoughtful process to get to who are really the deserving nominees for that given year. He said all that, and then you look at the best pop solo performance and see Yummy from fucking Justin Bieber. Please tell me more about how hard you strained your brain to get that one in there. Look, man, earlier this year, Deborah Dugan was talking about how unfair the process is and how people had vested interest in certain artists. You're not gonna pull the wool over my eyes and make it seem like everything's just all good all of a sudden. It's far more likely that The Weeknd was purposefully ousted, purposefully excluded this year because he didn't want to perform at the Grammys. I believe it way more because it doesn't make sense that he's not acknowledged in the slightest. I don't care if he wins any of these categories, but to be nominated is a totally different story, and the fact that he was completely ignored is way more fishy than they're letting on. Now, I know the general public will probably look at this video and be like, why should you guys even care? Aren't you tired of having the same conversation? Don't you get sick of paying attention to the Grammys? The Grammys are irrelevant. Number one, the Grammys are not irrelevant. I think the fact that the Grammys are already so established in music history is a justification that people who are currently nominated already this year have for being excited. Look at how excited Freddie Gibbs and his fan base were after he was nominated for Rap Album of the Year. Not even Album of the Year, but Rap Album of the Year. Look at how excited Flying Lotus was for being nominated for Producer of the Year. Look at how excited Chloe and Haley were for being nominated for their records. When you see acts as talented as these people are get excited over something that you claim is so irrelevant, it should make you think or rethink how you view this thing that you deem as irrelevant. It clearly has far more value to these people than you're trying to imply. And I understand why. Having Grammy nominated in front of your name clearly means a lot more to a smaller act than it does to someone like The Weeknd, than it does to someone like a Jay-Z, a Drake, and Eminem. And while these artists are large enough to have cultivated their own fan base, they have the luxury of saying, you know what, at the end of the day, fuck the Grammys, we don't need it. On the other hand, artists that are still on the come up, that are still making strides, that are still pushing their name out there, artists that can still benefit from having Grammy nominated attached to the beginning of their name, leading to possible endorsements, further money, further value, further deals, further relationships. Yes, this means something to them. So the Grammys still matters. They're an entity that's still beneficial to up-and-coming artists. So when you look at an artist as huge as The Weeknd seemingly being purposefully ignored this year in not just one, but every category, it should make you think, if they could do that to a dude that, I don't know, probably sold 500,000 records his first week this year, whose single was on the charts for God knows how many weeks, who was promoting his album and going on an amazing run for it even during this pandemic, adding massive value to his already established name. If they can do that to an artist like that, what have they probably been doing to smaller acts for I don't know how long? You don't have to tell me not to tune into the Grammys. I know I won't tune into the Grammys. At this point, there's nothing that the Grammys can do for an artist like The Weeknd. I get that. But to have an entity like the Grammys fake like they care about the music that's coming out and we're rewarding artists that are putting effort into their work, whether they're big or small, to have an artist that objectively had probably the biggest year be so blatantly ignored should make you think, if they'll do it to an Abel that's going to sell 500,000 his first week, what are they going to do to an Abel that's going to sell 1,000 his first week, 100 his first week? How corrupt are they going to be to an artist without a voice or a platform or a fan base? And like I said, people talk about these things pertaining to these entities because it does matter. It's not irrelevant. It's not something you can just scoff at. It's not, oh, just look away and they'll go away. That's not how that works. People used to say that about America, right? You don't like what's going on? Leave. Unfortunately, huge corporations and huge entities, especially ones that are ingrained in the music, unfortunately, those entities don't just die out because you turn the other cheek. They're not organisms that require sunlight or require food every single day, and you personally have to give it to them, or else if you don't, they're not gonna make it. That's not how they work. They've acquired far too many financial advantages and far too much power to be expunged by simply being ignored. The Weeknd doesn't publicly say something about them because, oh, they don't mean anything. Unfortunately, in positions like these where the entities are too huge, people look towards the person that was victimized as opposed to the entity themselves that need reforming. So we're kind of back to square one.